Good evening, everybody. Sorry for the delay there. As sometimes can happen, there were little technical difficulties getting on over onto Facebook Live. But thank you for joining us this evening nonetheless. My name is Ed Reed, and I am the program director here at Fair Count. Last May, Fair Count launched a Black Men Count, which is a statewide complete count committee that was subsequently launched into a national initiative. And the purpose was to ensure that Black men are counted in the 2020 census. But with the recent events in Minneapolis, Louisville, and even right here in Georgia, it's given the phrase Black Men Count a whole new meaning. Where these events are recent, they are indicative of a larger issue in our nation's history. When discussing the killings of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Rashard Brooks this weekend, and others, there's an undeniable pattern. This evening is our final episode of Undercounted Black Men Speak, where we will have put together a panel of men who are leaders in their community. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that Fair Count is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, and as such, we do not advocate for the defeat, election, or re-election of any person from any political party. In addition to being the finale, this particular episode is important because it is part of our Count Us for Real week-long celebration for Juneteenth. Juneteenth is the commemoration of the last enslaved persons being read the Emancipation Proclamation announcing their freedom. The goal of this series is to speak freely to an issue that has harmed our community for decades. Now, I want to turn to our special guest for the evening. This is one of my more exciting episodes. Not to say that the others have not been exciting, but the men on this particular call, I call mentors, I call friends. I really look up to them and the work that they're doing in their respective fields. So I want to get started by introducing them. If you could just give a wave. And I want to start with Mr. Kenneth Broswell. And then we have Mr. Jimmy C. Gardner. And we have Mr. Darrell R. Matthews Sr. And we are going to be joined in a little bit by Mr. Caesar Mitchell as well. But I want to thank these gentlemen. All of them have been a part of our Black Men Count initiative. Kenneth is a member of the committee. Jimmy is a member of the committee. And Caesar is a co-chair of Black Men Count. And Mr. Matthews has been working with us at the Census Bureau for quite some time with the Complete Count Committee. So thank you all for the work that you continue to do to make sure that Black men are counted. So with that, I want to get started with the questions tonight and get the conversation going. In the wake of the nationwide protests of police brutality, there have been major responses across all industries. Whether it's retail, government, media, it seems like Black Lives Matter is on everybody's lips these days. However, when the phrase was first introduced, it was not welcomed with open arms the way it is now. So with the first question, I want to turn to Mr. Matthews. In 2014, after killing of Mike Brown, it seemed like media outlets were very hesitant to embrace the phrase Black Lives Matter. What is different this time around?
Thank you, Ed, and to my fellow panelists, distinguished colleagues. I'm reminded of the Million Man March in 1995. I was a participant. I was part of the organizing committee. And there were some who were reluctant to embrace the Million Man March or to participate because the call came from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. I said then and I say now, we have to focus on the cause and the needs of the community as opposed to getting distracted by the who or the what. What has changed is there have been claims of mistreatment at the hands of police, but now it's being recorded, and the number of examples is legion. Now even journalists are being attacked by police, being fired upon with tear gas and rubber bullets. We're watching in real time the murder of Black men for no justifiable reason. And if Black lives don't matter, then you can't think that all lives matter.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Matthews, for the context there. I'm now going to turn to Mr. Gardner. In your advocating for men and women who have felt the sting of racial injustice, how do you think we should capitalize on the moment for real change?
First off, I want to say thank you, Ed, for having me, along with the most esteemed panel. And I will answer that question by going directly to the disadvantaged individuals right now, the people who are formerly incarcerated and coming home. Hopefully, they will be able to be in a position to have their voting rights restored. This is a perfect opportunity for those individuals that are marginalized to become part of our society again by giving them their full rights, giving them opportunities for fair housing, giving them opportunities to gain employment at an equal rate with the same opportunities. And this is a time that I think we should continue to move forward in trying to gain that for our disadvantaged individuals coming home.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to take a second here now and let Caesar join the conversation. And then I want to, follow up on something that Mr. Gardner has said there. Welcome to the conversation, Mr. Mitchell. We're following up on a question for Mr. Gardner at this point. You have a really unique story, and I've heard your story before, and you're doing really great work around criminal justice reform, and that I'd ask that tell us a little bit about why this is really so important to you and why you've made it your passion to continue to tell the story. And we've really appreciated your labor and your work on the Black Men Count Complete Count Committee.
Well, I'm a former professional baseball player with the Chicago Cubs organization, and I played for 4 seasons with them before I was falsely imprisoned on charges of sexual assault, robbery, burglary, and assault during the commission of a felony. I was convicted in 1990 falsely by the work of a DNA expert, forensic expert who falsified reports and testified falsely in my case in over 136 cases in the state of West Virginia. And I was sentenced to 110 years. And I went through 23 years without an opportunity to be heard before the first time in 2013. And it was an arduous fight. And from being on the inside, I know the struggle. And I know so many men around me that were innocent, that never got the opportunity to have their voices heard or have their cases heard. And I was granted that in 2013 by going into federal court and having my case reviewed for the first time. But I stayed in federal court 46 months before I was actually released on April 1st, 2016. And at that time, the state of West Virginia decided they would retry me on all charges to try to give me the same sentence. And it took 5 more months until September 7th, 2016, when I had all charges dismissed with prejudice because I brought in a DNA expert at a pretrial hearing that actually testified on behalf of my defense. So I feel I have a duty to give back and to reach back and to try to help individuals that are in dire situations inside and provide hope and provide some sense of normalcy for these individuals to come home and just to give them an opportunity to be heard. I want to be a voice for the voiceless. And I'm thankful to God, and I'm so thankful to have the opportunity to be home. I'm healthy, and that's mentally, physically, and spiritually. And that is a blessing that no one will ever imagine. 27 years in West Virginia Penitentiary, where there's all types of diseases and all types of just inhumane things going on. But I was blessed to come out of that situation. And now I fight for those that are marginalized, those that don't have a voice, individuals coming home that don't have opportunities to get housing, to get clothing, food, to be in a position to get jobs. So I try to advocate for these individuals along with wrongfully and rightfully convicted individuals, because we know the judicial system is just another branch of the injustice system that we are a part of. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing a story with you. Such a powerful story. So thank you so much for sharing. Across the country, we're hearing activists cry to defund the police, which we can have different meanings depending on who you talk to or who you ask. But all seem to agree that the money removed from police budgets should be allocated elsewhere in the budgets of cities and counties. So I want to now turn to Mr. Mitchell on our panel. You are former president of the Atlanta City Council. Do you think police brutality is directly connected to police having inflated budgets? Oh, you're on mute there, Caesar. There you go.
My apologies. I spend about 4 or 5 hours a day on Zoom. I should know what the mute button looks like. But I think the real question is whether or not the mandate of police is what it should be, and the answer to that, quite frankly, is no. And so when you hear the conversations regarding defunding the police, I think for folks who understand the term, they understand what that means is utilizing the funds that we devote to police for measures that are designed to protect and serve the community. And that does not mean buying more hollow point bullets. It doesn't mean in building more jails. It doesn't mean spending money on teaching police officers takedown tactics that take lives. What it means is that you reorder and realign how police officers are trained, the kind of orientation they go through, how they enter into the force, and what perspective they are not only that we not only hope they have, but they really are required to have. Community policing is and I think people sometimes don't understand that term. And in my time on council, I was a very big proponent of community policing because of the example I learned of my father, was an Atlanta police officer. And he was someone who was not an officer who thought that the way you advance in the department, the way that you show that you are a good police officer is to beat up and arrest people in the community. In fact, he had an anti-arrest mentality, as many of his colleagues who served with him have told me during my time in office. My father passed away when I was 9 years old, and so I didn't get to know him until I actually became an elected official and learned these really incredible stories of how he believed that having a real relationship with the community. I'm not talking about where the citizens know that that's a police car, but they know that human being that actually has that uniform on. That's about changing the mandate. But we've got to go beyond just basic reforms, and I'll stop here. We've got to say, how can we take some of this funding that is unnecessary and really promotes really greater hostility between the community and police, and put it into programs that improve education, put it into programs that build infrastructure in our communities to eliminate food deserts. We've got to get serious about that. And unfortunately, until we do, we're not going to be any better off. And all the talking and heartache and all of the advocacy, quite frankly, that's happening now will be for naught. But one thing I will say is that time passing in and of itself is not going to get us where we need to be, and it's not going to create the change we need.
Thank you. I want to bring Mr. Broswell into the conversation, and it's a great segue. So, in the event that the current movement leads to the reallocation of funding, where are some areas you think we could use more funding? Where do you think budgets should be raised if police budgets are decreased?
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things. When Caesar was just kind of talking about the money and its allocation, I'm at a disadvantage because I'm not exactly sure how money is allocated within police departments anyway. But I do know what to do with new money. And so whatever the impact is of them not having it, I know what to do with it if it passes our way. But I will say this as well, and that is, if the means to which we want to reduce funding in police departments is in a way of reducing police brutality on our communities, it ain't gonna work no matter how much money they're pulling, because the reduction of funds will not change the hearts or the workloads of those police left behind. And so, which means that it leaves the problem behind. The problem still has to be addressed. But if we're going to reallocate funds, I think that those funds should be reallocated into not-for-profits nearest to the people they serve, right? And so strengthening the not-for-profit infrastructure in communities, strengthening them by giving them monies to be able to do deeper leadership development, taking these Generation Zers and these millennials who want to get out there and do something. They're frustrated. They want to start, they want to organize, being able to actually develop their leadership skills so that they can be able to sustain themselves over the long run. Actually providing organizational capacity building for not-for-profits, right? One of the biggest issues with respect to particularly Black organizations with the loans that were just given out, the PPP loans, is that although we're doing great work in communities, we're often not doing work within structuralized organizations, right? We're struggling with the financial piece, we're struggling with audits and all of those things that put you in position to walk into an institutional bank and actually receive a loan. And so our community is being locked out of the very money that should be allocated for them to actually do the work that they're trying to do. And then lastly, in program support, right? There's not enough money in our communities to provide programs for those who, outside of what's happening with police, like this is not a new thing for our community, right? Our community has always had to deal with the issue of poverty. That's another conversation we got to have. The impact of poverty on our communities and our not-for-profit infrastructure's ability to be able to counteract the impacts of poverty. People aren't all going into businesses and looting, or even day to day. I heard a stat one time before from the previous, or probably back some now, sheriff and police chief in College Park. And we were over there talking about doing some fatherhood work in the area, and he was talking about the crimes in College Park. And he said the vast majority of the petty crimes that take place in College Park are crimes of necessity. So people aren't stealing because they're thieves. They're stealing because they're trying to pay bills. They're trying to feed babies. They're trying to make sure that the roof stays over our head. And so if any kind of money is going to come from the police department, it should go right back into the community that are serving the people nearest them.
It's a mouthful there. Thank you so much for sharing, Mr. Broswell. I want to now turn to Mr. Matthews, and I'm also interested if there are other folks that want to join in on this question that we're posing as well. But Atlanta has been a hotspot for protests, with the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and just this weekend the murder of Rashard Brooks here in the city. Here in Atlanta, these protests have been going on for the last several weeks. But Georgia also had elections this past week where the voter suppression made the front page and was called a meltdown. So, Mr. Matthews, from a media perspective, how do we make sure we have coverage of all elements of civic engagement, like the census, voting, redistricting? Can the media be used as a tool for voter education as well as information?
Well, it's very interesting you asked that, Ed, because that's what we're doing right now. One of the things that's the bane of my existence, they don't teach civics in high school anymore. And somehow our community, I feel as though, and I'm part of the problem, we have not conveyed the sense of civic responsibility on our folks. We talk about voting and voter registration and we leave it right there. And we don't understand, maybe because it only comes every 10 years, but all of the programs that we're talking about, all of the support that our community needs, the programs for those who are newly freed from prison, what they call the newly, I forget the term right off, but let's talk about the need for WIC. We talk about hunger in our communities, the need for SNAP, the need for housing, the need for support services for senior citizens, for hospitals. That is all a direct result of having our numbers counted by the census. And we somehow don't see the connection. We know about voting, but we don't understand or seem to pick up that the census numbers determine who and what we have to vote for. They determine the number of districts. They determine if the Congressional 5, Georgia Congressional 5 is a historic seat of power for Black folks. But if those numbers don't go up in that district, we could lose a seat, or that seat could be melted into 2 other seats. And then we'll be talking about we don't have anybody speaking for us. I live north of Atlanta. I hear a lot about They're always building stuff in up north. The roads are better up north. The MARTA stations, the bathrooms are cleaner up north. But when you look at the census self-response rates, up north, they're running around high 60s to 70%. Right now, I'm heading up a special initiative for South Fulton County, where our rates are at the lowest at 40%, at the highest in the middle to high 50s. We're talking about leaving money on the table, talking about billions of dollars of money over the next 10 years. We think things are bad now. Over the next 10 years, they're going to be decidedly worse if we don't claim our fair share. It was Eric Holder that said on one of your programs, Ed, not too long ago, it's all about power and getting our fair share from the government. And we've got to do this by any way we can, any means necessary. We've got to document what's going on in our streets, but we've got to also use that to be a teaching tool, a communication tool. And we didn't have this technology 10 years ago. We didn't have it 20 years ago, but we've got to use it now because somehow we're missing the point that we can go into a community and complain that there was only one Wendy's there and now it's gone. Well, businesses make decisions. Governments make decisions based on not what you need, but what the numbers are that justify those needs. If you can't prove it, if you can't quantitatively make your case, then you don't get the Whole Foods down in the Cascades. You don't get do you know there are counties in Georgia that don't even have a doctor, a licensed doctor that lives in them, let alone a medical facility? We're talking about power, and we've got to claim it from all ends. The protesting is one form of getting the attention, but after we sit down, after it's over, what's the plan? You know, we've crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge how many times now? And when we get to the other side, what's the plan? I know about the photo ops, but what's the plan? So I have uncomfortable conversations with people who look like us, who are in elected positions in 9 cities in South Fulton County. We've got to do more to make sure we're counted. When the lost money, the local option sales tax money is divided across the state, the mayors down in South Fulton say, I know I have more people than that. Well, then doggone it, we got to get them counted. So we've got to use every tool at our disposal. And yes, journalism has changed, but the methods of conveying information, these are our new drums. These are our new war drums. So I can go on, but you touch the spot with me because I spend most of my life trying to help people these days claim their money. It's not my money, it's their money coming to their community or not going to their community. It's going to go somewhere. If you don't claim it, it's going somewhere else, but it will not just sit in the pot. So
that's right. That's right. Thank you so much for adding that context and background. Is there anybody else that wanted to add in on that? I saw some nodding of the head. And any other?
No, he hit it on the head. That conversation of civic engagement is something that we have to have deeper conversations around, and we can't expect. I know that we used to be taught those things in school, but that starts by learned behavior at home. You vote because you saw your parents vote. You fill out your census because you saw your parents fill out your census. You volunteer because you saw your parents volunteer. You gave freely of yourself because you saw your parents give freely of themselves. And so until we start to really begin to do that level of work in our homes, one person at a time, we cannot expect that our educational systems, as stretched as they are, can take on this piece of work, which is to teach our community to be engaged civically. And I think this last thing I just want to add, because we provide our life skill classes for parents in the Cascades. And one of the things I'm always struck by, one of our curriculums is around life skills. And so I remember when we put together this curriculum, one of the modules in life skills is a 2-hour class on responsibility. And I remember having someone ask me, why would you have to teach grown people to be responsible? And my answer was, then you assume that all people were taught to be responsible. You can't force someone to be responsible who doesn't understand what responsibility needs. And it's a shame that we have to step that far back to get so far forward. But in some spaces in our community, in order to rebuild ourselves, we're just going to have to take some smaller steps.
You know, I think that's you when you said life skills, you made me think about civic skills, Kenneth, and it's really piggybacks on what Daryl said. You know, when you talk about the issue of civics not being taught in school, that is a big problem. But also, you know, as civic leaders, as elected leaders, we have a responsibility to build that civic muscle and civics skills. And I can recall, I think back on my time on the city council, where I would make it my point to take ideas that came from the community, and particularly when it was young people, and have them take that idea and we would fashion a policy around it. And have them walk with that policy through the process and see it made a law and see it have impact, candidly. And I think that's something that we have to be committed to doing when we're in positions of influence, power, and really policy making, to make sure that people feel like they can enter into the policy making process, and we as their representatives can actually take their idea and make it real. And I think we have to be intentional about that, because as elected officials, we're elected to represent, and we're elected to make policy, but that policy is not going to always come out of the elected officials' head. One last thing I'll say, and Daryl, you made me think about this when you mentioned how low the numbers are. I know one of the things when we first started on this journey was the concern regarding, well, I don't know if I want to fill out the census because I don't want the government in my business. And I think that is such a silly comment, because if you think in this world where your every tweet and your Facebook post doesn't put you squarely in the hands of the huge data complex we now have on this planet, you got another thing coming. And so the government is the least of the folks that you want to have having your information. But whenever you enter into cyberspace, all of your information is there, and there's an algorithm waiting for you to communicate with you, message you, and influence you. So saying that you want to be in the government's specter, I think that's something we got to really get past.
Mm.
Yeah.
Hey, you bring up so much good stuff there. And one of the things, talking about policy, and we've seen now some of the protests coming out of particularly the Black Lives Matter movement, is that there is a lot more policy coming out of it. People are marching at the state houses. They're submitting those policy resolutions. We've been seeing some states are coming to the table to bring up about reform. So we are seeing not only the protests, but we are seeing the policy coming with that. And I think coupled together, we will see some substantial change in some of our communities. I want to now turn to Mr. Broswell, because he kind of teed it up very nicely for me there in his last remarks. But, we know often that in our community, there's a notion that Black men are not present as fathers. However, as we lift up police brutality, we see that many fathers are in our community are being killed or leaving their kids without fathers, uncles, cousins, so many strong Black role models. As a new father myself and program director of Black Men Count, we partnered with Black Dads Count partially to combat this particular narrative. And we've seen, even with the events of this weekend, another father taken away from our community. As a leader of Black Dads Count, where do you think this narrative comes from, and why do you think it persists in our communities? And before you maybe get into responding directly to that question, tell us a little bit about Black Dads Count and your vision and why that was such a necessity.
So before I even get to that, I just want to and I haven't seen Caesar Mitchell for a while, and I just got to publicly say, when I first came to Atlanta, this man didn't know me from a can of paint. And he wrapped his arms around the concept of working with fathers and trying to figure out how to help us get more deeply into Atlanta to really do this work. At some point, I would love to share with you the trajectory that we've been on over the last 6 years that has led me right to Ed Reed and Fair Count around the census, and really beginning to kind of look at Mr. Matthews talked earlier about civic engagement, and it is what we know about dads is If I can change how they feel, I can change what they think. If I can change what they think, I can change what they do. If you're not willing to do the heart work, not the hard work, if you're not willing to do the heart work with men, you're never going to get them to do the things that you desire for them to do. And their heart is mostly surrounded around their children. If you can motivate their connection to their children, you can get them to change behaviors. And so for us, Black Dads Count was about talking specifically to dads about their civic responsibility to their children to engage. That on one hand, yes, you're leaving a lot of money on the table, but you're leaving money on the table for your children. So you can't complain about the resources that your schools don't have in your community if you're not doing the things that's going to put your fair share on the table. You can't complain about the people who are not in office if you don't register to vote and vote. Right? You can't complain about the teachers when you're at your school if you're not volunteering, if you're not serving as a mystery leader. You can't talk about kids not having anything to do after 3 o'clock if you're not coaching. You can't talk about kids not having dads in their house if you're not mentoring. And so ours is an accountability mechanism for dads, which says that you have a responsibility, not just a right to fill out your census form. You have a responsibility to your children to do it. And with our fathers, when we dig into that space, into that heart space, they don't come back with that answer, Caesar, about the government. Because that's why I laugh so hard, because I've had so many guys say, nah, I ain't doing that because, government just want to know what I'm doing. And so we just dispel all of that conversation. But as it relates to fathers and, why that is so important in terms of conversation here, for us, there's 3 different answers in my one answer, right? Because we do have to kind of talk about where we come from to talk about where we are to then address where we're going. Some of it is in a historical answer, right? It goes back to slavery when our families were split apart and men were demonized and men were separated from their wives and from their children to disband and discredit families, right? And then some of it is a systematic answer when you move into the 60s, or not the 60s, but the 70s with TANF and welfare, where policies were put in place to drive men out of home, particularly low-income Black men, and mothers could not even have any, and I remember this growing up in Brooklyn, so this is not just a story, this is not just Claudine for me, right? This is the Braswells. My mother had to hide things in the house so that when the social worker came, they could see no presence of a man in the house, right? And then there's this struggle over the media and societal narrative that demonizes us by continuing to plaster our faces on the 6 o'clock news and the things that we're doing good, but fail to talk about the things we're doing bad, but fail to talk about the things we're doing good. And then we land in the data reality, right? The data reality is the conversation that no one wants to talk about because that doesn't support the narrative, right? The data reality is in this country, 2013, Pew Research and Bureau of Statistics says that African-American fathers in this country are the most engaged fathers in the day-to-day activities of their children than any other cohort of fathers in this country, including white fathers, Asian fathers, and Latino fathers. In our community, it's not an issue of if dad exists, because 100% of every child, biological child in this world has a father. The question isn't, he could be deceased, he can be incarcerated, he can be deployed, he can be a lot of different things. But the one thing he's not is non-existent. But as long as we keep claiming and saying that he's non-existent, it takes the accountability from us to look for him. And so we have to begin to start asking, where is dad? And believing in the data and beginning to see not only our Black men, but also our Black women through the lens of assets and not the lens of deficits.
Woo, boy. Take us to church there. That's a lot. Jimmy, you want to add in something there?
Yeah, I think I need to share this with the audience. Throughout my almost 30 years in prison, 27 being exactly, I noticed so many Black brothers that were motivated to do the right thing, motivated to try to get back home to that one common denominator, their children, family. And like you said, the black man gets a bad rap about him not being a good father and him not providing and doing this. The black man is one of the most sensitive human beings on this earth. And the black man cares about their family and their babies and children more than any other man. And I witnessed this firsthand. Programs were started so individuals will stay in line, stay in order, so they can be able to see their daughters and sons on weekends for visits, be able to try to help out with homework, just to be in the population, to be on the phone and write letters, to work with their daughters and sons. And that's something that the world needs to hear. I watched it. I watched what the world would call or view or describe a black man as a bad person in society, or someone who was reprobate or something to that degree. However, the judges may define some of us, but I know that the black man is one of the most compassionate, humble, and loving, kind, caring individuals to their children that you will ever meet. And that's why I specifically am bringing Gardner House Incorporated to Albany, Georgia, to secure that family segue. If individuals are going into institutions, coming out of institutions while they're in jail, have that bond there and have opportunities for the child to be reared with father in their lives, with father knowing that daddy loves you and we're going to keep this bond together. Nothing's going to separate us. And that's the purpose of fatherly love with their child. And I witnessed that. Black man, black power, love. Yes.
Wow.
So much. Thank you, Jimmy, for adding that context and your experience there. I want to also say that Mr. Broswell, I know, is going to have to leave us in a little bit. So if you see him leave out the screen, he does have to make another appearance at another event tonight. But I want to get into our next segment here. So Fair Count is in the midst of what I mentioned before is our Count Us for Real, a week-long celebration of Juneteenth. And part of that, has been engaging our Black male fraternities to get counted in the Count Your Frat Challenge, which launches tonight as a part of this program and our finale for this series. Nice. It goes until Friday at midnight. And what we're doing essentially is we're challenging our traditional male fraternities, including Sigma Pi Phi fraternity, also known as the Boule. So six fraternities. To see who can have the most people counted by the end of the week. And, we have a form that will be shared on social media. We'll be emailing it. And we want to make sure folks are also spreading that message to their network. So send it to your fraternity brothers across the different organizations. We know that these organizations already have a long history of civic engagement for our communities. And some of our men tonight are members of various organizations themselves. We see Jimmy there with his shirt on. So I want to go to him first. As a member of Phi Beta Sigma fraternity, what are some ways that your organization in this moment and historically has advocated for Black people to be involved civically?
Thank you, Ed. As a member of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, we have a long history of being on the lines, front lines of marching, protesting against injustice and inequality. Back to 1936, when brothers were out there marching and protesting against lynching, we began that early in this fight, and we proceeded on into the civil rights era with our honorable brother A. Philip Randolph and the honorable brother John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis. These individuals were on the front line marching during the civil rights era, along with many other brothers representing the blue, and being just as diligent and giving as much back to the communities and expressing themselves against injustice and inequality as one would think, especially during 1995, when the Million Man March was ongoing. I believe our Alpha chapter at Howard University was so ever present in the Million Man March and protesting and just showing support. And even in today, where we have Cornell University. These young brothers and sisters immediately came out and marched and protested against and stood for justice and against injustice. So a special shout out to the brothers up in Cornell University and the sisters and my Zeta sisters. And I just want to say that even right here in Albany, Georgia, where I am, my chapter, Beta Nu Sigma, and my Zeta sisters over from Albany State University, we participated in marches, protests against inequality, injustice, and definitely against the brutality that the police have caused to so many of our young brothers and sisters, the countless names. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You represent the organization well. So I want to go to Caesar next. You know, you're a member of Omega Psi Phi fraternity and have a strong history of civic engagement personally. You know, I've gotten the pleasure to work very closely with you, as managing Black Men County, you being one of the co-chairs of our initiative. You know, in fact, the challenge itself was sort of your brainchild. You came up with the idea several months ago in a way to continue to get the fraternities involved. And additionally, you know, you were very instrumental in making sure that Black Men Count was a national initiative and spread throughout Sigma Pi Phi fraternity, or the Boule nationally. So we certainly appreciate your vision and your thoughtfulness there. But how has your involvement in this fraternity helped you give back to your community?
Well, I know I'm assuming I cannot begin without talking about the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, and really, you know, the fundamental cardinal principles of our organization, our fraternity, our manhood, scholarship, perseverance, and uplift. And that really is about being strong, knowing your stuff, getting in a fight and staying in that fight until it's over, and bringing somebody along with you. Fundamental concept of uplift. And that's something that is really just impressed upon us from day one in my fraternity. And it carries over into our lives as fathers, as husbands, as friends, as servants in the community, and as professionals. And so for me, it's you know, it's always great to be with my fellow brothers. But one thing I'll say, and I think it's important to say too, particularly as you get older and get beyond some of the collegiate stuff, the bonds that exist between Black fraternities and sororities is profound. And I really applaud you and Fair Count and Black Men Count for tapping into that, because for all of our fraternities, and certainly, you know, I speak for Omega Psi Phi in this particular moment, but all of our fraternities really is about bringing people together and serving the community, uplifting our fellow man, our fellow woman, and really making a better society for our young people. And that is at the core. So the best thing we can do now is to be present in a time such as this, whether it's being out there on the front line supporting the protesters, or whether it's being attorneys and people within the criminal justice system to make sure that people have a fair shake as they face injustices in the criminal justice system and in general, and really being there to teach and mentor a young person that's coming along, and not being afraid to speak truth to power, and to really to stand up and to stand with our brothers and sisters and encourage them to be a part of this fair count and this census process. There's so much on the line here. And so I applaud you. And of course, with Sigma Pi Phi, the Boule, I applaud your work, your effort in providing the fraternity with an opportunity to really help make this something that has a national feel to it and a national initiative around it. So I'll stop there. I know we're going to run short on time, but I could talk all day about this.
Well, no, I appreciate it. And, you know, before you hopped on, and, you know, I really said that I appreciated all of the men on this call. You know, I'm not gonna throw ages out there, but I of course am younger than the four of you, but I've appreciated the nurturing that you all have given to me, you know, in over the last year that we've done, and so I can certainly see that vision in all of you in the work that you do on a daily basis. You're not on tonight on Facebook Live just to talk about it. You're living it and doing it on a daily basis. So I really appreciate it, and I know that you all are grounded in that way. You know, lastly, for this particular segment, I want to go to Mr. Matthews. You know, you served as president of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity from the national Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity incorporated from 2005 to 2008. You know, what ways did you use your leadership to encourage others as individuals and Alpha Phi Alpha as a whole to engage in civic participation?
Thank you, Ed, for that. During my time as president, we crafted a strategic plan and a mission statement to focus on those areas where we wanted to make a specific and a strategic impact. And we chose to do a few things and to do them well, as opposed to trying to boil the ocean and trying to be all things to all people. And, you know, sometimes our organizations want to be all over the place and be all things, and then we don't make anybody happy because we're not successful by and large. But I led by example. I was on the front lines in Jena, Louisiana, decreeing the mistreatment and the fate of the Jena Six. We conducted Alpha legislative days across the country, meeting with governors across the nation, conducted workshops and seminars during the annual Congressional Black Caucus Legislative Conference. And because we have a rich history of advocacy and civic action, following the examples of other alpha men, such as Dr. Martin Luther King and Maynard Jackson, Andrew Young, almost endless list of transformative leaders, I made sure that we brought along young folks. We had what we call a plan. What do you call it in corporate when you planning for succession planning? We made sure that we had young brothers at our side because we weren't perfect. And we tried to help them to not make some of the mistakes we made, but we realized that we would have to turn it over to them. And to follow up on something Caesar said, coming out of school, see, we compete and we jaw jack on the college campus, but when we get in the real world, when you get out in life, you're just glad to see a fellow Greek. Mm-hmm. We used to watch Channel 26 down at City Hall every day in my department. And we used to look at the president of the city council, Caesar Mitchell, and we used to say, man, that brother's got more patience than anybody I've ever met. He'd sit there and listen to everybody. And see, I have worked for Sigmas, I have worked for Omegas. You know, my first time around at the census, I was embraced by several Omega men. So we appreciate the brotherhood of man, all told, because we realize our real enemy is not among ourselves. Mm-hmm. So that's the spirit and the vision I tried to bring to Alpha Phi Alpha. And we're an organization with a lot of aggressive, transformative brothers. So channeling that energy was the main challenge, not getting them to go forward, but to channel that energy. And I'm proud of what they're doing today, to this day.
Awesome. Thank you so much for participating and sharing a little bit about your organization. I unfortunately am not a member of one of those Greek organizations, but you know, some of you are still working on me, I think. So I got a little time there. I got a little bit of hair still on the head, so I think I got a little time. So I'm gonna move on to our last segment, and this is for this is for everyone, and it's called Black Men Blank. You know, so we've done this as a part of all of our Undercounted Black Men Speak series, but our series is called Undercounted Black Men Speak under our program of Black Men Count. So I want each of you to say a verb behind Black men. So Black men, whatever your verb is, that you think addresses how you feel and represents you as a person. So I want to start with Mr. Matthews.
Black men persevere.
You took my word.
All right, well, Jimmy, I'm gonna skip around and I'm gonna go to Caesar and come back to you. Caesar, you want to?
Black men strive.
Okay. All right, Jimmy, you got another one for us?
Oh, sure. There's so many. I would just say black men love. That's
Good one.
it.
It's
We
powerful.
love. Period.
We love, period, right? I want to say because I've been involved in this episode for 3 weeks now, and I'm running out of verbs. But there are a ton of verbs to articulate black men in our status in this country. So that list is never ending. But I want to say black men govern. You know, one of the things that I continue to see is more and more people involved in our government or want to be involved in our government, and you know, us giving them a platform to be able to do that and mentoring them and allowing them to create that policy. You know, those people that are protesting and also creating that new legislation and creating that policy. We have, you know, the status to be able to govern across this country, and we are doing that. And I think leading that example is very important for a lot of us. So thank you all for participating in that segment. Thank you for those that are at home that are tuning in to our final episode of Undercounted, Black Men Speak. You know, thank you to each of our panelists, Mr. Matthews, Mr. Gardner, Mr. Broswell, Mr. Mitchell for joining us today. You know, thank you for all of you that have participated over the last several weeks with this series. You know, again, I said we are part of our Count Us for Real Juneteenth celebration, which is a week-long series. We started yesterday with church service. We're ending on Saturday with the virtual backyard Juneteenth party. We have a DJ Mixmaster who's going to give us some old school jams. And so we really are trying to be creative and innovative, reaching people virtually to make sure that we still maintain that social distancing and that we're being healthy, but also having a real impact on our communities. We hope that this has been an enlightening conversation for you all tonight. And if we didn't answer your questions in the comments on Facebook, check back in the comments and we'll be able to answer them there. Remember that you can fill out your census at any time now, and there are 3 ways to do it. You can go to my2020census.gov. Again, my2020census.gov. It takes about less than 10 minutes for most people to complete it. You can also complete the paper questionnaire if it's been mailed to you. And then there is a toll-free number that you can call at 844-330-2020. Going 844-330-2020 if you want to complete it over the phone. Until next time, you know, follow Fair Count on Twitter and Instagram and here on Facebook. And we hope to talk with you soon. Have a great evening, and we look forward to seeing you at all of our Juneteenth events this week. Thank you so much.
Be well.
Thank you.